As you know, Tina said, I've been here over the years. Okay, I better run through myself really quickly. My connection with Lamri Tangpa Center actually comes as an interpreter. So in 2008, I came here for the first time, and I used to sit sort of over here, and then Khensa Rinpoche, his name is, there's a Tibetan Lama who would teach in Tibetan, as I would translate into English, questions back and forth. So I speak fluent Tibetan, and that was my job for some time. After that job finished, Geshe-lo, he went back to India for a while. When that job finished, I bounced around. I did a bunch of things, but ultimately I ended up with a degree in Sanskrit and psychology and started teaching sort of meditation courses and these types of courses which combine Buddhist approach to meditation, like a contemplative aspect with a modern scientific approach. And there's lots to say about that. Anyway, along the way, I started a PhD researching exactly this, the sort of stuff we're going to talk about. I will talk about some of that research in the coming weeks, not tonight, I don't think, which is all finished, I'm pleased to say. I've been coming here for years saying in the middle of the PhD, doing, anyway, I'm 3 weeks into having a PhD, right? So, a bit like ending a hostage drama, really. So, what I have done in the past is, actually I've done all sorts of things. I've come in here and talked about taking up like a different way, modern ways of looking at mental health in relation to Buddhist topics, in relation to the Four Noble Truths, in relation to the 3 trainings, in relation to different things. I've played around with this a lot over the years, and it's fun for me. It's quite interesting for me. What I'd like to do this time around is try to make it as like practical and everyday useful as possible. Yeah. Because what I have sort of noticed what I've noticed in talking to here, the main groups of people I kind of talk to are people who've been Buddhist a long time, or at least committed Buddhist people who are perhaps not getting the day-to-day benefit out of the practice they're doing, right? So like the people who are into it, like committed, understand how it works, and running through the Buddhist path, so to speak, but maybe not noticing the day-to-day effects. And for me, so there are some really neat and, I should say that, very sophisticated and clever kind of tools that psychology has that can help you maximize how your meditation practice could help you right here and now. And then I have another group sort of people who really looking to take control of their own well-being and don't necessarily want to be Buddhist, but they're confident there's something in the Buddhist side of things that can help. And so either way, it really works for me because I deliver from the contemplative, from the Buddhist side of things, can just deliver information that is straight out of Buddhism. I don't have to change it or adapt it. I can just sort of deliver it as it exists. And the same with these in relation to, or so that it works in tandem with these kind of, how to say, tools and techniques and so on that modern psychology is so good at coming up with. So that's where we're at. And so with that in mind, then there'll be a little bit of meditation practice each session, not very long, just one in the next 4 weeks as we run through this. Okay. So, and then the last thing, one more, just because some of you are new to me at least, then just make sure if you have a question, you just interrupt, right? Like, I'm not contractually obliged to deliver this slideshow or anything, I'm sort of here to make sure it's helpful for you. So please just interrupt, because that's why it helps me to know what you're interested in. Okay. So here's the theme this time round for me, and it was sort of the theme of the research we did. That's why I've sort of really latched onto it more recently. It's in relation to mechanisms, or in relation to systems, or think about it like this. Here's where I'll go. In psychology, some of you would already be aware, we have we have lots of what we'd call syndromes, disorders, yeah, this sort of thing. And what they are, what a syndrome or a disorder is. Syndrome is a good word. It's a cluster of symptoms. So we see people and they seem to have the same, cluster, different types of symptoms. And so based on that, we figure that there's the same thing wrong, for them. So think about it, this is how it works in physical medicine. We have, say, clusters of symptoms, and we can tell that there is this same issue, and people are being sick, maybe even dying, but we don't know what it is, and it's classified as a syndrome. AIDS is a good example, autoimmune deficiency syndrome. We know there are people becoming sick, even dying of these clusters of symptoms, but until they found the HIV virus, there was no one knew the cause. Find the HIV virus, now your syndrome becomes a disease. Changes, right? Once you have a disease, it's because you know a cause. When you know the cause, you can start trying to develop cures, right? If you don't know the cause, you can develop treatments and symptom management, absolutely, right? But you can't really make a run at curing. And in the diagnostic statistical manual that many Australian and American psychologists would use in diagnosing mental disorders, there are no mental diseases, right? Because of the simple fact that within psychology, there isn't a single disorder for which a cause has been found. This is important. What that means is you can't develop cures. You can develop sophisticated treatments, but it doesn't explain things like how come the anti-anxiety medication works for you and not for you? Or how come the anti-anxiety medication works on your depression, but not your anxiety? These are the problems that psychology is struggling with. Why is it that, say, antidepressants are so effective for 6 to 12, maybe more, 15 months, and then they're no longer effective? Why? We don't know. Actually, we don't know. And so this is quite different to, say, a Buddhist approach, where, actually, I'll say one more thing about that, because that's where the research is going and has been going for some time. It's looking into, well, what are the mechanisms behind this? What are the systems? What's going on that creates these clusters of symptoms, and what can we do about it? This is what we're looking at in psychology, and it's having some success. Like I say, very sophisticated symptom management, and to the degree that some people are relieved of their symptoms that don't come back. Are they cured? Well, technically no, but that's okay. That's something to be happy about. So this contrasts with Buddhism. Buddhism sort of just posits an antidote to suffering, so you can just end suffering altogether, right? And it's interesting because from a Buddhist perspective, how that is done is by understanding the mechanisms by which suffering occurs. This gets a really interesting parallel now. We have a Buddhist approach versus a psychological approach. And I just want to reaffirm that I think they go together really well, for reasons we'll get to in just a moment. But from this Buddhist perspective, you get sort of, when you sort of investigate for a little while, what we're talking about in Buddhism is an end to suffering, And how do you do that? Well, you understand the mechanisms behind suffering, and then you interrupt the mechanisms. This is sort of how it works overall. You interrupt those mechanisms and understand them well enough, you can permanently disable them, right? And this is, some people mistake, they think, Buddhism's depressing or pessimistic because it's always talking about suffering and all this stuff. These are people who don't know anything about Buddhism who say this, right? Because the incredible optimism that you don't find in many other contemplative traditions is that you don't have to sort of do all this extra work in order to develop bliss and happiness and all this stuff. The position is that that's kind of your natural state. And what we have running are all these systems and mechanisms that interfere with that. And that's the problem. If you can disable the suffering mechanisms, then you're left with all this, let's just call it happiness. That's a very unsatisfactory word. But that's what we got. Languages are unsatisfactory generally. So, so it gets interesting because that's the system. Okay, from a Buddhist perspective, understand this sense of suffering. This is first noble truth. Understand suffering. Then, what are the mechanisms that create this suffering? Understand those. what would happen if we interfered with those mechanisms? Well, they would finish, so no more suffering. How would I do that? And so there are these four kind of four stages of this four-pronged approach to how we disable the mechanisms of suffering the way we go. So so that's very interesting. But of course, what happens now is that from this perspective, the causes of suffering are very subtle. So they happen, I'm just sticking with the Buddhist approach for the time being. The causes of suffering happen in the mind, right? And in terms of our interpretation of things, but it happens at a really, really subtle level, and it happens really, really early on as we engage with things. I'm going to give you an example in a moment. It was a little in a moment. Happens really early on. So in actual fact, most of us, don't really notice, say, that we're in some kind of distress until a long time after this mechanism is up and running, say in the midst of an emotion, for example. So yeah, it's not till I'm in the midst of an anger or maybe fear or sadness episode that I realize I'm in what we call psychology, we call negative affect. I'm in this situation that's unpleasant. So this is quite a long time. It's quite coarse, I guess. So here's the problem from the way in fact, you know what? I'll jump to a slide now and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Maybe this will help, or maybe it'll make it more confusing. You'll let me know, I'm sure. So think about it like this. Oh, delay. Okay, this is me. Right. So then I encounter an object of some kind. Make it move. Okay, so here's me. I encounter an object. And then I have one of three reactions, right? Immediately. It's a positive, negative, or neutral response, right? Either I want to move closer, I want to move away, or I don't care. This is sort of it. In Buddhism, there are three feelings. This is not a big hit in Byron Bay, I expect, but it's only three. And this is what they are. So this is a very, very raw reaction right off the bat. So I encounter an object, I interpret it immediately, and so this happens really fast. The second moment we say in Buddhism, really fast. Encounter an object, I have a positive, negative, neutral reaction. So from a Buddhist perspective, this is the playing field, right? When you're trying to remove suffering, this is the playing field, the interaction of Corey and the object. Really, really fast. It's very, very early on. Most people will not ever develop the attention skills necessary to be aware of that moment. Very, very difficult. Which is problematic, right? Because then people, and like myself and many of you, people get drawn to Buddhism. And for my example, I started meditating. It seemed to work for me. This sort of depression, anxiety stuff happening a long time ago, and it seemed to work for me. So I followed it up, and then I met lamas. I went to India and I met these Tibetan teachers and so on. And then I learned to speak their language, because when I met them, I was like, wow, like I was really interested. I'd like to do whatever you did. Like whatever you did seems to work. I'm keen to give it a go, right? So that's so I got drawn in this way. But then you understand what they're talking about, because they're saying, oh yeah, well, you can end suffering. It's like, well, that seems there's no downside to this. Then you realize actually what they're saying is it takes quite a lot of work. It's very subtle. It takes some time. So in the meantime, what happens is you can be drawn into Buddhism. Think, I think there's something here for me. I like the people, whatever system you're in, and you get drawn in and start to do the practice. But of course, you might not notice big differences in your day-to-day life, because the conversation is all right up this end of the spectrum, all the way to the left. How the subject engages with the object. This is Buddhism. It's what it's about, right? Here, and so that's problematic if some of us are sort of in, say, anxiety or depression or these sorts of things, which happen much further down. So let's have a look. So here's sort of a timeline. So Corey encounters an object. There's one of three feelings, we call them. Vedanta, it is in Sanskrit. It's a feeling. Tone is a translation people use, because feeling isn't, you get the idea. That's the word we use. So say if it's a positive feeling, it then can proliferate out into emotions. And so emotions happens to be my area too. You might enter some kind of enjoyable emotion. You'll be happy to know that some researchers say there are 16 individual types of enjoyable emotions, right? So we'll look more into this in upcoming course here, the Cultivating Emotional Balance course. Contempt, for example, some people quite enjoy contempt, especially teenagers. So, you know, the point being this, that it proliferates out from this immediate interpretation of positive, neutral, negative, then it proliferates out into these emotions. And now, well, I'll keep going. You know, it can be neutral, might just be bored, doesn't, you know, no real problem. A negative feeling in that interaction with an object will then lead to an emotion, fear, sadness, anger, there are others, right? And here's, I guess, my point is that it's really possible, this is very uncontroversial, right? It's possible to get really emotional and act under the influence of emotions for some time and not know you're doing it. Is this okay? It's possible to be emotional and not know that it's happening. So you think about, we're saying, so Buddhism's saying, well, you know what? The cause of suffering happens here. And they're very clear about it. We'll come to that. You know, the cause of suffering is happening here. But it's possible to get all the way out here and not even know anything's happened yet. This is the kind of the issue, right? So you got people saying, oh, we can remove suffering. That's super exciting. What do I do? Here's what you do. And then you start doing it. But you don't really see these results because, you know, all this other stuff's getting in the way. And what we have is this. We've got a meditation practice with a long-term goal, like a very serious long-term goal and aim. And then you have all these short-term or smaller things popping up and interrupting and interfering. A lot of people, I'm sure some of you will have experienced this in your own meditation practice if you've tried, right? So what we have then, some people give up meditating for sure. I totally understand, you know. But actually, sorry, I'm getting excited. I'll keep coming back. I had coffee on the way here. So, so here we are on this same thing. Look, Corey engages an object, 3 types of feeling, positive, neutral, negative. We can have a fear response, sadness, anger. These can become disorders, right? That's to say if I have fear responses at a higher frequency and intensity than average, than normal, we're talking about a pathway to anxiety, sadness, same thing for depression. Anger can lead to all sorts of dysfunction. Interestingly, there are no mental disorders in the DSM related to anger for adults, which is super interesting. We'll come to that more in the CEB course. There are for children though, not for adults. And so this is where we're at. This is sort of kind of a timeline or the possibilities, a choose your own adventure of what happens when Corey engages with an object. Does this making sense? And every object, and there are 6 domains in which I can experience objects. That is, things I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and then the far more interesting domain of the mental domain. Things that I think or remember, or mental imagery, or random rubbish that, you know, stuff that's in there, the circuits, the whole circuits. So that's all in here as well. It's not just these 5 senses. There's a mental domain as well. So this is where it gets sort of interesting. Okay, I can swap this out just to elaborate a little more. So I have an object here. Let's just say I change this this object to pizza, right? So I like pizza, you know, so you have a real kind of sense of, okay, a real object. So Corey interacts with pizza. Does Corey like pizza? Yes, Corey likes pizza. So let's assume a positive, and then there are sensory-based emotions that arise from all this. So you think, well, it seems like a fairly, you could maybe get a red pen and make this a red pathway because this is what happens. But, you know, what if it was an extra large, you know, 18 slice pizza and I'd eaten all 17 pieces, right? Is what happens then? Does pizza lead to a positive? No, actually. It gets interesting, doesn't it? Probably it leads to negative, probably a sense of fear, sadness, probably all 3 actually. I hadn't thought this through actually, indeed. But yeah, actually, probably all 3. So the point being that, you know, we sort of think about, and this is where Buddhism gets, and actually psychology in more recent times has got really interesting, because it's actually, it doesn't start here. We think, oh, there's Corey. Corey's standing around doing his thing, and then he encounters an object. He likes the object, it's a positive feeling, away you go. Or he doesn't like the object, it's a negative feeling, away he goes. We think this is how it works. And that's, to be fair, is how it appears. That's what it appears. You put a pizza in front of me, it looks to me like the pizza will deliver me happiness. That's what it feels like. I know that's not true, right? 100% know for sure it's not true, but that's what it looks like. Because if that were the case, then the more pizza I ate, the happier I would be. There's no way around this logic, right? You just said. So then you're okay. So in terms of all these things, all these possibilities that are going on over here, it looks like this is the cause, and it's not, right? Is the cause here, perhaps? Or maybe the cause is sort of here. It's this interaction between the two, right? This starts to get really interesting, okay? Because once, the appearance and the way I think is, oh, I have an annoying colleague or co-worker, because this is an uncomfortable truth. I'm going to warn you now, right? I have an annoying neighbor or a colleague or whatever, and it looks like that person is inherently annoying from their side. I don't think about a contribution from my side. Right? The same way you put a pizza in front of me, it looks like the pizza is great. It doesn't feel like there's a contribution from my side, but there is. In fact, what's going on all the time is there are things, if you like, objects being presented to my senses, and it will include the mental. So there are 6 domains here. So there's objects being presented to my senses, and then there's my interpretation of those objects. And my interpretation of those objects is my entire reality. And that interpretation changes based on things as dumb as how much pizza I've eaten, right? So then you start to think, okay, what we have in psychology is, to a large degree, we have people, people aren't seeking out help till they're way up here, right? Until these negative feelings have led to repeated sort of emotional episodes at higher intensity and frequency, and have led on to so-called disorders or syndromes, which we have here. And so if we treat the syndromes, which I'm all for, if we treat the outcomes, or we treat the symptoms, we will get some kind of result. But the actual mechanism of the anxiety is still in place. Does this make sense? Buddhism is about mechanisms. Psychology has come around to this idea without really relying too much on contemplative, or a little bit on contemplative traditions. But psychology is coming around to this idea. It's super exciting, I've got to say. It's about the mechanisms. It's, for a long time, we just tried treating the symptoms because we thought that was the issue, but turns out it's not. This is how the pharmaceuticals, which there's a place for anti-pharmaceuticals, but this is where people thought it's a cure, and it's clearly not. So to try to pull this together, then, this is how I sort of got interested in this, is that when I'd been in India for about 6 years all up. I'd come and gone a few times, just studying Buddhism. First I learned Tibetan, right? Then I studied Buddhist philosophy, and I could study in Tibetan, which was really helpful, and translate, of course. And so when I came back to Australia after a long time away, there was a program, this Cultivating Emotional Balance program, and it was set up from the Mind and Life Institute. I'll talk more about that later. And what it is this combination of a psych-based understanding of how emotions work, mixed with this the tools and techniques of a Buddhist approach. And what you get, if you think about here, is you get technology, tools, and so forth that are designed to operate here, right? They're designed in super subtle place, but they don't have to be. You can actually deploy them out here if you want. You can use them in terms of symptoms, in terms of emotions, and so on. And what you find is that if you're looking, one of the things you're looking at, well, anxiety, for example. So anxiety is essentially, anxiety is fear emotion episodes happening at a higher intensity and frequency than so-called normal, that's interfering with your life. This is what a disorder is. It has to interfere with your everyday functioning, right? So you look at that and you think, well, if you're interested in mechanisms, which we should be if we're interested in suffering, frankly, then is there something behind the anxiety? Well, yeah, we can move back a bit here and look at the emotions themselves. We know lots about emotions. Tons of research into emotions. There's no mystery about them. Quite easy to understand, really. So then, when you're looking at all is there something that's driving the emotions? The answer actually is yes. Attention. Your attention is driving the emotions, and the attention happens way back here, right? So this is sort of where we're at. If you want to combine start to look into how to combine these different approaches and traditions, and get some bang for your buck out of it. You don't necessarily, and I'm really serious, it's not necessarily helpful, because if someone comes to me, and some very sort of Buddhists have been a long time, it's no sort of secret, comes to me and they say, yeah, I've got all this anxiety, blah, blah, blah. I think that, meditation would help. I don't think it's helpful to say, oh, you can be free of suffering altogether. There's what you mean. I don't see that. I mean, maybe for some people, sure. I mean, it worked on me actually, but mostly I don't think it does. You're better off saying, cool, Buddhism has things to say about why you're in this situation. So let's look at that, so you can use it right here and now. And then what we can start to do is teach people a psych-based understanding of what's going on for them in terms of, say, anxiety or depression in these examples. This happens to be what my thesis was all about in my research. So anxiety, depression. We can give them some, we call it psychoeducation, it's fun to say. We say is give them some understanding of what's going on for them, and then we give them the tools that will actually help them settle right now. But actually what you'll find is it just keeps working its way back on this timeline we have up here. You say, oh yeah, the symptoms are under control, but then the emotions, actually, you can get your emotional reactions under control. Oh, how interesting. So now I can, and this is from cultivating emotional balance from this course, that's kind of the first kind of stage, if you like, what the line we want to get people to, at least, is to be in control of everything you say and do, no matter how emotional you are. This is what we're looking for. And if you understand what's going on for you as emotions happen, and you have a little bit of attention, mindfulness training that helps you be aware of it in real time, it's super powerful. Doesn't stop emotions. We don't really need to stop emotions happening. We just need to be in control of what we say and do when they are happening. So yeah, we'll unpack that more. So this is where we're at. If I had to sort of place this whole thing together about this blend of contemplative or Buddhist approaches with psychology, in a nutshell, if I had 20 minutes to do it, which I did, this is how I sort of explain it. Yeah, without getting too detailed. And it's helpful maybe for you to think about this, because from my side, to some degree, I see my job up here as convincing you, convincing you that you can take some degree of control of your mental health, right? And that this will do it. And I think it's up to me to explain how it might work, at least a little, because I think I owe that to anyone. It's the only reason I got so into it, because the Lama, especially when I could speak to them a little bit, because they explain something and you try it out and you think about it and you come back and you say, no, actually, I'm not so sure, I have doubts. They're like, yeah, it wasn't quite right. And they just and they say, it's actually like this. They give you this really coarse version, and then you go away and you come back and you say, I don't know. And they say, yeah, it's actually more like this. You think about that and you come back, you go, wait, I've seen another flaw. They say, yeah, it's actually more like this. And you just keep getting more and more subtle. It's a very cool way of operating. They just keep coming back. And they don't feed you this, you don't walk in and say emptiness and blah, blah, blah. You don't walk in like that. You walk in and they say, yeah, here. And the framework is so helpful. The skilled teacher, you walk away thinking, I've found it, and then you work away at it and you realize, oh, not quite. So, that's what happens here. You sort of start working your way back from this, say, the symptomology end through to this engagement of subject and object, which is happening here. And the last part to say about that in terms of all of this is, although the mindfulness training, which we'll look into here, does exactly that. It makes you more aware of what's happening for you earlier and earlier and earlier along this timeline. Once you're talking about this in here, or maybe actually probably about in the feeling, there's a whole system of meditation practices that rely on mindfulness, but they're not just mindfulness training, designed to help you see that for yourself and unpack them and manipulate them so they'll work for you. It's called these 4 applications of mindfulness. Which again we'll look at if you're here in June for the CDB course, but it takes a bit of work. Okay, how's that? Questions, outbursts, objections? Not an objection. How about you online? Any contrary people out there? I'm quite fond of objections.
Corey.
Yeah.
So I've been reading a lot about anger.
Wow. Can I just ask maybe what you've been reading? Where on anger? Okay. Okay. Cool.
Very helpful. And in one of the books, it sort of mentions that, yeah, in life, I really love the positive, neutral, negative, right? And on any given day, let's say 10% is positive, 10% is negative, 80% is neutral. Well, ballpark neutral.
Okay. Yeah.
Why the hell do we focus so much on negative then?
Oh, that's easy. In fact, this is a great question because this is the sort of stuff. Because I'm so interested in Buddhism, this great opportunity. So yeah. So the question, in case you haven't heard online, is if there's a certain the amount of the day where things are 10%, I think was your 10% positive feeling, 10% negative, and this huge 80% neutral. But yet you have issues with anger, then why is it that the anger is so front and center, all the time? This is easy, and we don't even need Buddhism, right? Which is, I always like to give psychology some props when I can, because sometimes it's a bit hard. One really easy solution is what we call the negativity bias. We have a very adaptive attention system, and what it does is it monitors the environment for threats. Not only that, but it will interpret neutral things as threatening and negative because there's no downside, right? My favorite example of this is, and you think about how this has worked over for evolution. A person who mistakes their garden hose for a snake, no harm done, right? A person who mistakes a snake for their garden hose, less likely to pass their genetic material on to this following generation. So over time, right, this has been weeded out into there's a benefit to overestimating threat. So from an evolutionary perspective, that benefit really was functioning at its best as hunter-gatherer society, and it really worked. Right? There wasn't a lot, there's no benefit, but there's not a lot of benefit in a situation like that, in just sitting around talking about just how great everything is. You know what I mean? Like just having a party and then the neighbors show up and just steal your stuff or whatever. Like it's a bit rough. So yeah, a negativity bias, and it's just built in. So very simple. There are sort of other reasons, but that's the main one. We're actually, it would appear, even born with it. And so when you start to look at other meditation practices, so I'll bring some examples of this next week. There are different types of meditation, and there's what we call constructive and deconstructive. We'll look into more detail of this soon. But once you get past this placement style meditation, which we're about to do, and you start to look in these constructive practices, these develop kindness, compassion, equanimity, and empathic joy in these things, then some of that is actually designed to counteract this. So you think there's of these four immeasurables. We'll unpack this more. But in this suite of practices, in this constructive side of things, there's a practice which is about really just focusing in on, say, things I've actually done well, times I've worked, altruistically or well helped for others, times I have seen other people act well. Like you call them to mind because you have to control for the negativity bias, right? Because there's all this really great stuff happening in the world. The whole world's just full of amazing, super cool people, even in the US. But we don't see it. It's not what makes the news. It's not what we need to control for all the negativity biases that are out there, because it's otherwise you're not just confronted with this stuff all the time. And we have this attentional system, and so the good precursor to we have an attentional system, and basically for our purposes there are two types of attention. This is the easiest way to think about it. Two types of attention. One is called endogenous. That means it's under your control, right? So that's if you're hopefully maybe right now for me and for you, if you're writing an email, playing music, this stuff, this is your controlled attention. And then there's an exogenous or a captured system, and they're different neurological systems here, right? So you have these captured, controlled types of attention. And so if most of the time we like to have our attention under our control, but it's very, very easily captured. In fact, in the auditory domain. So if if there's a noise outside that's threatening, that's about 1/500th of a second, right? That your attention will be pulled over to there, and it will take up to half a second to actually bring your attention back onto something, and it can take even longer to really focus back. So we have these systems that favor the capturing of our attention, right? And in fact, the capturing of our attention sets up another system mostly in the brain called the HPA axis. And what that does is release cortisol and adrenaline and it makes us aroused and stressed. So even just having your attention pulled away from being under your control to capture starts a stress response. Just while I'm on that, our society, is designed around trying to capture your attention. There are people with postgraduate degrees who only did that so that they would capture your attention, because the more they capture it, the more money they make. These are highly motivated people, right? And so how often are we ever actually at our baseline? It's hard to say. Non-REM sleep, maybe. Otherwise, what's going on? Constantly, right? And, these, of course, adding to the problem. So that's where we're at. We have the very easily captured attention system, which is good because if you're driving and a car cuts you off, or a child runs out in front, or you're at the beach and a frisbee is coming at you, there's all these reasons to act automatically and without really thinking that save your life and save the lives of others, actually. Fear response will save you from, say, a traffic accident, these sorts of things. So if there's really easily captured attention, when your attention is captured, it will assume the worst. It won't, it's not like for the most part, it gets captured. If it's captured, it'll probably be, if it's neutral or threatening, it'll ramp that up because then it'll make you take precaution. So that's why, actually. And that's why these four immeasurable, these constructive meditation practices are so interesting, because it's like, I'm sure in the history of Buddhism until recently, I doubt anyone ever talked about a negativity bias. I don't know. I don't know the Tibetan word for that. But they knew it was happening because they made these meditation practices to control for it, so that I would be aware. That's why we have teachers. That's why even the recitations and things are in relation to our teachers and Buddhas and these sorts of things, to just remind us that despite appearances, there's a huge amount of super cool stuff going on that we're not paying attention to. How's that? Sorry, long answer to a short question. So with that in mind, here's the thing. We have two types of attention. I've already run through that. It's very easily captured. This is okay for the most part, but we don't want to constantly capture it, because a hunter-gatherer society attention and emotion system isn't working for us in the 21st century for the most part. This is the problem. Very well adapted as hunter-gatherers. Right now, it's a bit problematic. Is there something we can do? Yes, actually. And you can do meditation practice. What does that mean? For our purposes right now, it means this. For some time a day, just like you would lift weights or swim or run, to build a bit of strength, we're going to sit down and we're just going to try to put our attention on an object. We'll go through this in a moment. Your main job is not so much to ideally, in the perfect world, sit down. I'll tell you what will happen. Find the physical sensations of the breath as I breathe naturally, and I would attend to those sensations just consistently for the whole time. That's a perfect world scenario. It's probably not going to happen. What's going to happen is I'm going to start writing a shopping list or planning revenge on my neighbors and this kind of stuff. Right? So I need to notice when that happens and bring it back. And as we've already seen up on the slides before, it's very easy for your attention to be caught up in all these things and not know. Right? So this is the issue. And for the moment, the issue isn't that I should be able to stay paying attention to this. No. The issue is, do I notice when I'm distracted? Yes. So that's a bit weird. Okay. So if you sit down and you start doing this, and then you start noticing as a human being in Brisbane in the 21st century, if you start noticing you're distracted, this already makes you a bit weird, right? And then if you actually do something about it, and bring your attention back, it's quite extraordinary. You're a very small percentage of people. Oh, you're like the 1%. It's my only way into the 1%. Anyway, so don't need to get political. So here's what's happening then. Just for a little while, think about it like this. I'm just trying to notice when I'm distracted, so I pull my attention back. Why would I do that? Because a captured attention is at the heart of non-lucid kind of unconscious reactions. And captured attention, just as you saw, is the beginning. Captured attention sets off the feeling tone sets off the emotions. So the heart of an emotional reaction is attentional capture, right? Do emotions lead to negative outcomes? Yes, no, sometimes, of course, right? Not always, but they can, you know. And so what we have here, now you'll see how I got started. What we have here now is a mechanism. Controlled attention becoming captured, overestimating things, working unconsciously and so on in a way it proliferates out into this emotional reaction, possibly even to symptomology, you know, doesn't matter. I should go this way, shouldn't I? You're left to right. So that's how it works. You can interrupt this mechanism at any point. How? By bringing your attention back under your control. It's that simple. It's that simple. It's quite incredible, actually, that for all the mental issues that are going on for us, actually, if you just interrupt the mechanisms, the good news is, how do you interrupt this mechanism? If I'm distracted, the way you interrupt the mechanism is first by relaxing the body and making it, releasing any tension, then just bringing my attention back to a chosen focal object. This is it. That's the first step, let's say. No, it's more than the first step. It's the basic way of interrupting these mechanisms, right? When you interrupt them enough, you can start working on more. There's all sorts of stuff you can do, right? But if you don't interrupt that mechanism, if you don't pull your attention back under your control, all the will in the world, all the desire to develop kindness and compassion and insight and all these things will just remain academic, you know, because if you don't attend to something, it doesn't exist for you. Just flat out, right? Even William James knew this. For the moment, what we attend to is reality, he said in 1890, right before behaviorists came along and buggered psychology up for decades. Yeah. So that's it, right? So the reason I've done all this up to here is because the importance, you know, the stakes that, you know, that we're playing with here are huge. So just for a little while, in a few moments, I'm going to ask you, we'll just go through that. In a few moments, just going to ask you basically to pay attention to the sensations, like physical sensations of the body moving as you breathe. And you just note, I'll talk you through a little bit. Noticing when you're distracted, when you notice, you relax, release, and just bring your attention back. It really is that simple. A couple of things. The last thing. So I don't like to be the posture police, but I am, so I'm stuck with it. So here are the three options. Supine, which we haven't got set up for you, maybe next week we will. This idea in yoga of a shavasana, you know, which means corpse pose, is a great, if you can stay awake, this is a great way to meditate a completely legitimate posture. So you can see these here. It's good to have something under your knees if you're going to try this. Most of us as Westerners, our hips just make it problematic. So it's good to have something under you, like hers is perfect, under your head, under your knees. Okay. Next, of course, is a chair. This, you can see the difference between her. You want some support here. You really want your back. In a perfect world, your back is straight, but you can lean back into the backrest. These chairs aren't ideal. What that often means at home is if you have a really thin cushion or something, and you can just strategically place it so that your back's quite straight, and you just lean back. So you're really straight, but the pressure's on the backrest. Great. You can put your hands wherever you like, you know. So there's that. So last one. Of course, if you're sitting cross-legged, and we haven't set up for you, but we will next week. If you sit like this, just go back and sit on a chair, right? I love these shots. They're all over the internet. People It looks so uncomfortable. Here, this one really makes me angry because look, there's like all these cushions they could be sitting on, and they choose to sit on the mat, and look how far their knees are up. Look at this guy, and this is because we're Westerners, we're all like this, but you can't see, like, it should be a tripod if you're doing this. If you're sitting, your hips should be higher than your knees, so across the board, your hips should be higher than your knees, and there's a tripod, your knees touch, your bum touches a cushion, that's really stable, you just straighten your back up, it's very simple, So these are the three postures: lying down supine, sitting in the chair, or cross-legged, of course. In amongst all this, I have this one too. I've seen this on lots of yoga retreat ads. I was like, well, to me, it's not a good, really, ad for the yoga teacher. Anyway, I digress. So one of the most important things of all of this, though, is that it's a posture that's unique and specific to meditation. Okay. So if he's meditating in a chair, no problem. But just make sure it's not the same way you watch Netflix in a chair, right? Same with lying down and so on. It's got to be, this posture is very specific for meditation, right? Your body will learn this very quickly. It's, again, fascinating research into that. You don't need to go into it now. And so, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's the only thing I could find on the internet where someone was sitting, okay. And of course, you can sit on this perfectly without even cushion. So the beauty of growing up in a culture. Oh yeah, last thing. You're in a yoga, I've been to yoga classes where they like us to sit like this. Please don't here. Put your hands just flat like this, or however, whatever works for you. Because the point is this, and this is going to become really, really important in the coming weeks, and especially in the CEV course for those of you coming. Here's the pitch, that concentrating is actually your natural state. If you rest your body in its natural state, allow your breath just to flow naturally, and just allow yourself to be aware of things, your natural state. You don't have to force. So and that means even stuff like this. You don't want to, no, that is not your natural state. It's called a yoga class, right? No worries. But not here. Here it's about being absolutely just resting back in a sense of naturally being aware, because you're just naturally aware, and controlling that. Okay. So that's more than enough talking. So please get yourselves comfortable. Everyone at home here, however you're going to do it. I would talk you through a brief meditation session, and then away we go. So as best you can, make it a posture that is unique. So I have a timer on my phone. I'm not like texting my wife or anything. Here's the first thing we do. That's some kind of motivation. So you can have your own, of course. I can give you one if you're not sure off the bat. Just to be in control of what I say and do when I'm emotional. There is a starting point. You may have others, is fine. With a little bit of convincing from me, you think, well, okay, being relaxed in a natural state, attentive is the solution to this, controlled attention. So just a little while, and I'll talk you through the first one. We're going to scan through the body and just release tension. Okay. So you start between the eyebrows and just gently work your way down. If you find tension in the body that's unnecessary, right? Just linger on it. Allow it to release a little. Won't be perfect, doesn't matter. Then you just move on to the jaw, even in your throat and shoulders. Through your arms, your elbows, wrists, and even your fingers. Just nothing unnecessary. Same through your back, down to your hips, and your thighs and knees. All the way to your ankles and toes. And I'm just going to let you do this again in your own time. Just releasing tension as you find it, and then moving on. and feel relaxed enough. It will never be perfect. It's okay. Just allow your awareness to fill the body. The classic texts say it's like a fragrance filling a room. You just become aware of your body, and particularly just those physical sensations of the body moving as you breathe. Ignore all your ideas and opinions about it and just rest in that awareness, just being aware of the movement of the body. At some point, you might notice you're distracted, which is good news, because noticing is important. Your job is just to relax the body, release the distraction, and reset your attention back on the physical sensations of the breath. Yeah, at some point, if you notice you're distracted, it's good news, right? You just relax, release, and start again. The whole point is to notice when you're distracted and interrupt that sort of mechanism, It's important also to stay relaxed. So from time to time, quite regularly, just do a really quick scan through the body like you did at the beginning, looking for tension you can release. If you find some, that's good, release it. If you don't find any, that's good too. And just come back to it, following the physical sensations of breathing. Regularly check the state of your body with a quick scan. Also check the state of your mind if you're distracted or if you're on target. It's like this. Mindfulness sort of attends to the sensations of the body moving as you breathe. And ideally you would stay here, but the reality is you'll get distracted. When you get distracted, often you'll get tense in the body. So the main job is following the breath, but regularly you just do a quick check through the body to see if there's tension and just see, am I distracted or not? Ask the question, do I need to make an adjustment or not? If not, good news. If so, also good news. And from time to time, you might find yourself just resting in stillness, attending to the motion of the body. Which is a summary of what's happening, really. You're doing your best just to pay attention to the sensation of the body moving as you breathe. Inevitably, that gets interrupted. Your attention captured, that is. And when you notice that happening, you just relax the body, release distraction, reset your attention back on those physical sensations of the breath. Confident that you are learning to interrupt mechanisms of emotions, disorders, suffering in general. And regularly just a quick check through the body to see if you're tense, or the mind to see if you need to make an adjustment. There's quite a lot to do in the beginning, but it very quickly familiarizes, becomes automatic and natural. So to support you in this, here's one tool you can try as well. As the body breathes out, see if you can just incrementally, just a little, just relax the body without getting drowsy or slouching. Just release a little as the body naturally breathes out, and stay relaxed and focused as the body breathes back in. All the while following the sensations of that breath. As you gain familiarity with this, it becomes more and more natural. Body just resting still in its natural state, the breath just flowing in its natural rhythm, and your awareness just naturally directed to the sensations of the breath. where you manage to resist and relax even as the potential distractions and emotions arise. Without really changing anything, just resting right where you are, naturally aware. Just again, call to mind why you're interested in learning to meditate and doing the practice. Control with your emotional reactions, or maybe other motivation, whatever is fine. And just feel as if you have, even just being here, developed some momentum to achieving exactly that. Just by coming here, doing the practice and so on. So, how's that? Any questions or comments from anyone? Nothing? You know, I'll just start talking. So a few things about that. As I said, I really need to get through some sort of basic, important stuff this week, and then we're going to get really into these mechanisms in the coming weeks. Okay. So, sorry. Okay, so have a look at this. I know some of you have seen this before multiple times. I want to run you just through a kind of timeline of an emotional reaction and then compare it, explain. Anyway, you'll see. So look, here's what we have. Imagine I'm afraid of dogs, for example, which would be problematic because I have a staffy. But let's just say I am afraid of dogs. Maybe spiders, public speaking, doesn't matter. And I detect, and for some reason I see a dog. This is the cool part about emotions. Don't actually need to see a dog. I only need to hear a dog. I could just see a bush around the corner I think is a dog. I don't even need a dog, right? To actually have a fear emotion triggered. You just remember a dog even. So you detect a trigger, then the autonomic nervous system is up and running in some kind of emotion, say in a fear response, your blood pressure rises, your body temperature rises, facial expressions change involuntarily, right? Tone of voice. There's all sorts of things that happen to us in an emotional reaction automatically. Yeah. That drives behavior, which is almost certainly automatic and unconscious. More than likely a repetition of behavior of the past. Like once you're emotional, that's what happens. And that leads to an outcome which will be positive, negative, or neutral, and more than likely a similar outcome which you've had in the past. Okay. So is that all right so far? Yeah. Okay. There's one element missing here that I'll just put that actually, I've already mentioned this, that in amongst all this is the attentional capture. This gets really important for us, okay? That in detecting that trigger, my attention's pulled away from me into that trigger. So I'm going to just insert that into the timeline. And here's we've got a trigger captures my attention, nervous system up and running. Now there's behavior that I'm not necessarily aware of, and then outcomes like this. So my job, right, as always, is to interrupt the mechanism. It's always. So, and I like perfect world examples. So there's a trigger, it's I come across a dog, my attention is captured. So think about this, my attention is captured. I notice my attention is captured. What do? I relax, release, reset. We just did that, right? So relax, release, reset. Now, oh yeah, actually, let's be honest, let's come back. It probably isn't going to happen here for most of us. It's going to probably happen here, maybe here. It might even happen further off the timeline retroactively. That's okay. But the point is, at some point within that emotional event, I notice that I'm emotional, and my response to noticing is to relax, release, reset. That is, pull my attention. It's inevitably captured, and I know it's captured because I'm emotional. And I pull it back under my control, and now all this stuff, now it's a completely different setup. Now I have behavior that is under my control, right? And I have an outcome that is probably the one I desired, because it was tension under my control, behavior under my control. I'm going to try to say and do something constructive, which might be just to shut up, which is sometimes the case, And so you do this enough times. This is the cool part, right? The only reason you've got that upper line there is because you've done it so many times. Had this trigger, this reaction, you've learned the behavior. And so automated it, we say, right? In the brain, long-term potentiation, there's all sorts of reasons behind this. But if you actually interrupt that enough times, this lower line actually becomes the automatic response, right? Then you switch, and then over time you extinguish that one for the most part. And then you're left with this. So that's how this whole thing works, right? I've noticed I have a problematic emotion with my, emotional stuff with my neighbor. So, okay, I've got a new outcome. Next time I see them, if I find myself being sarcastic or something, I will try to bring my attention back and say something constructive, come up with a little plan. And then what happens? I bump into my neighbor at some point, I notice myself getting worked up. I just relax, release, and then I'm in control to say and do something. And it really helps if I've thought about what I might say and do earlier, So you start, and you do this enough times, and it's a game of percentages, You do this enough times, you'll flip that more constructive response to being automated, and you don't have to put so much effort into it. First, you have to. And the reason I presented like this is because it might be clear now that emotional timeline that I'm talking about here is basically also the timeline of a distraction. So if you're meditating, right? So meditate. Tell me if this is your experience. Meditating. Yeah, no worries. Scan through the body. Oh, I'm pretty relaxed. Breathing naturally. Follow the breath. That's great. And at some point, it's like, oh, I'm like writing a shopping list or doing all these things, right? Remembering this thing I should have said to that guy that time. Did I leave the stove on? All the classics, right? You notice, and you don't even know how long you've been doing it for, right? Like so, and that's because at some point I was directing my attention to the movement of the body, and then my attention was captured, and I was unaware of the capture, and then just sort of running with all this stuff that comes up then, and I don't even know, because once your attention's captured, it's way less likely that you're lucid, that you're conscious of what's happening. And then it goes on for some time until you suddenly get in, oh, look, and that's why you say, oh, do I need to make an adjustment? You look, do I need to make an adjustment? Yeah, I do. And you reset and you start. The point being, okay, emotions are basically distractions. The anatomy of a distraction in your meditation is exactly the same as the anatomy of an emotion in the outside world, right? So if you train, you can do it if you want. So, okay, I'm just going to notice when I'm emotional, and I'm going to, come up with some great plan. Next time I see my neighbor, I'm going to comment him on his, I don't know, lawn or his dog or something. That's all well and good, right? But actually, if I see him or her get distracted, then I'm not really in any position to pull off this new plan. I need to interrupt that mechanism first before I can pull off this new plan. So I can, all the best will in the world, my percentages will be low for the sake of 15 to 20 minutes or more, of course. But let's say 15 to 20 minutes a day for a few weeks, a couple of weeks of doing what we just did, right? Then you get all that stuff in your emotional life for free, because you think about my first diagram, that I put up there, you're operating way to the left of that timeline. In a meditation session, you're operating way on the left. You're trying to just catch yourself as soon as you get distracted, ideally. You're trying to monitor that. Not only that, but when you notice you're distracted, you have a plan. You have a contingency. I notice I'm distracted, I relax, release, and bring it back, and I keep doing this. By doing that regularly, on the cushion in meditation, what you get for free in the outside world is noticing when you're emotional. Because the emotions have happened way after everything else. There's been contact with an object that captured your attention, that released, actually the other way around. You've got an object, it brings up a feeling of 3 types that captures your attention, and away you go, non-lucidly, not knowing, until you interrupt it. So that's why this is so important. You know, these practices, we're actually sitting here and choosing what I'll pay attention to and sticking with it, noticing when I'm distracted, and all you're really trying to do in the beginning is notice the difference, but the qualitative difference, the difference in the experience of having your attention under your control versus when it's captured. That's what you want, because at the moment we don't know. That's why you can slip into captured attention and not know what happened, right? Like you're just sitting here doing my thing, I'm writing an email, and then suddenly I've stopped and I'm thinking about, hockey. Sorry, I lived in Canada a long time. The playoffs are on, so it is capturing my attention a lot. And my team won today. Yes. So, just as an example, so you can be like, so there's all these things, and it can just slip in without knowing. So what actually, if you do the meditation practice like this, like we're doing, that's what starts to happen. It's like, wow, they're so different. The experience of having your attention under your control versus pulled away is really different. And at the moment, we don't know because we haven't refined our experience enough to know. That's the reason. You refine your experience. What you'll find is actually you get more and more. You can differentiate these two more and more and more to the point eventually, especially you spend some time in retreat, slipping from having controlled attention to captured attention is like cataclysmic. Like the whole world just completely turns upside down. So it happens like this, and you know it happens because it's so drastic. What do? You relax, release, reset. Why? Because you've practiced and doing that so many times and automated it that's your response. This is where you're headed, right? But in the moment, if you don't even really barely tell the difference between captured and controlled attention, all this other stuff is academic. Academic. Spend a bit of time understanding the difference between captured and controlled. All this stuff's available to you, including getting more and more and more and more subtle, because that's just entry-level stuff. You can go a long, long way with this. A long, long way. Yeah. So, you already know I had one interruption already, so I'm guessing you all know you can interrupt. I'm okay. Actually, sorry, I've said that, and now yeah, sure. I'll just no, I'm going to keep going. I see your question, Susan, but I'll get back to that because I'll finish this. Here's a final way to think about everything that I'm talking about here. In these, to me, these are source languages, Tibetan, Pali, and Sanskrit. This word we translate as meditation, and I translate it as meditation. It translates much better as familiarization or cultivation or habituation, right? You're trying to familiarize yourself with controlled attention, right? Because you don't meditate, you do mindfulness meditation, sure, but it feels much better to talk about cultivating mindfulness, right? Because that's what's really happening. You don't meditate on compassion. That's a complete waste of time, which we'll look at later. You cultivate compassion. Don't sit around just going compassion, compassion. No. Right? You cultivate it, and there's ways of doing that we'll look at. So this word meditation is problematic. It translates much better. This course that, I'm sort of so involved in this project as part of my research, and we're running the course here, this cultivating emotional balance is very deliberately chosen. So, these are the sorts of things you would cultivate: kindness, compassion, insight. So mindfulness is worth just having a moment on too, even though it's one of my pet peeves. So it translates very, very simply from these languages as well. Just remember it, right? It's like this idea of bearing in mind is a really nice way of putting it, actually. Just remember it. In Buddhism, there's not really an element of this non-judgmental stuff. This is new stuff that was invented in the last 50 years or so. The evaluation of an object, so like the judgment of an object isn't the issue in Buddhism for the most part. It's the reactivity is the issue, right? Well, one of the reasons you got to just keep in mind, it depends who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to someone who's realized emptiness and some Arya being, then they don't need to worry. There's other things going on. People like me, it's different, because that interaction with an object, so me interacting with pizza and then these one of three feelings arising, that's always going to happen, right? Which means the next moment is judgmental because I've made a judgment call as to whether it's positive, negative, neutral. So essentially, for an ordinary person like me, non-judgmental awareness isn't even possible, which means mindfulness is not possible, which is why in Buddhism, no one ever talked about non-judgmentalness, which is a word I just invented, which is why they probably never spoke about it, which is why the definition never included non-judgmental, right? Because the issue is reactivity. That's the issue, right? Reactivity, of course, through these 5 physical senses, but in mental reactivity is where things get really interesting, right? And that's what Buddhism's about, because that's where this mechanism of the causes of suffering occurs in the mental domain. Come to that. Maybe. So yeah, the things that you might try to remember, your focal object, in our case, the movement of the body, but also bigger picture goals like having a better relationship with my neighbor. These in the outside world, you still have these sort of things you want to be mindful of. It's one of the things that mindfulness training does, is it sort of helps you shift the balance where emotions are very short-term things. Emotions arise and they're in relation to something happening right here, right now. And their purpose is to motivate action to remove that, or to deal with that, not necessarily remove. That's what emotions are for. And then, so if I have a long-term goal of, getting along with my neighbor, borrowing his lawnmower, it doesn't matter, if I have some long-term goal, and then my emotions get in the way of that, there's mindfulness that will help me shift that balance. Being mindful, paying attention, knowing what's happening as I engage with my neighbor with my longer-term goal. Oh, I need to borrow his lawnmower. That's going to change the way I engage with him, rather than if I just allow myself to automatically respond and say something, sarcastic or mean or whatever, So this is subverting these short-term things that emotions get in the way to put our longer-term goals at play. This is obviously also the case if your goal in Buddhism is liberation or enlightenment, and you have afflictions in the way, the trouble, which they are. Trouble. This is actually a neat model. I should put this model up too. Because if I have this version as a Buddhist of trying to achieve enlightenment or liberation, at least these things, and the way I achieve liberation is removing karma and afflictions, which we know, right? But they happen really fast. They happen so early on that just sitting around trying to remove karma and afflictions is really difficult. But if I actually take a step back and say, why don't I start with my emotions, and start controlling what happens there, then you can drill down, right? Over time, you can start to talk about like more and more control over my responses to things. Anyway, I've jumped ahead. It's okay. And then these last two. These are important if you haven't heard this before. So here's a definition of mindfulness from I think 3rd century scholar called Asanga, from a text called Here is Levels. Non-forgetfulness of the mind in relation to a familiar object having the function of non-distraction. This is a definition of mindfulness, right? That we would use, most Tibetan systems would use this. There are others, but the Tibetans would use this. And so that's this thing, paying attention to the focal object, the movement of the body. This is it, mindfulness. In order to maintain that, right, you need to know if you're distracted. This is the whole point. So we have, traditionally in mindfulness training, in this tradition, we're given 2 tasks. Mindfulness, which on the object, introspection, which monitors that. So if you think about it, this is what I just talked you through. Directing your attention onto the movement, the sensations of the movement, and then from time to time, just checking the body, checking the mind. You're asking the question, do I need to make an adjustment? Is mindfulness and introspection work together? As you get better and better at this, you need the introspection less and less, basically. It's more complicated. It's more interesting than that, but we'll come to that in the 3rd week, I think. Yeah. Is this all making sense? Yeah. I mean, and then this last one. So these 3 terms are really important. Mindfulness does the heavy lifting, placing your attention. Introspection monitors that, right? And then this focal object at the moment is the sensations of the breath, but to that in more detail. Yeah, okay, I'll do this. I'll come to that next week. It's okay. No worries. So there's one question. Is there any other questions or anything just before I wind up? Nothing? Okay. Couple of things. Well, hey, firstly, this, I mean, some of you already know, I'm sure. This QR code, what will happen is today, like I've mentioned a few things, but I have a place where I will post all the slides, any things that I mentioned, and I'm going to talk about a lot of videos and articles and these books and these things as we go. And I make a note of them and I drop them in this space. It's free to join. It's good. And well, you'll see when you go there, you've got options, but the free one is called resources and support. And there'll be this course will have its own little space. So you can just, I dump it all there. Often I put it there early. So that's, that's up to you if you'd like to join that or not. But that's where I'm going to put all the supporting content. So you can join that or ignore it at your leisure. And then the last question here. Hey Ruby, yeah, just let me know your question. I'm going to just, because Susan asked, would it be beneficial and possible for very young children to experience benefits from meditation? I would say unequivocally yes, as long as the meditation is the parents or the teachers. Yeah, is that right? Moving on. If you are interested in mindfulness for children and so on, sure, the person to look up is a woman, and there are others called Susan Kaiser Greenland, like a hyphenated last name, which is hard to forget. Susan Kaiser Greenland, look her up. From my perspective, to be honest, when you look at Buddhist cultures generally did not make their children meditate. They didn't do it. In fact, most lay people didn't meditate. That's so yes, would it be beneficial and possible? All the research tells us if you want to help prisoners train the guards, you want to help the children train the parents, you want to help the students train the teachers. So everyone's sitting around, all distracted with it. People go, I wonder if it would help my son if he learned to meditate. I'm like, no. The book title, I can't tell you. The name is Susan Kaiser Greenland. I'll put an article of hers in that space. That's why I keep a pen up here actually. So there's a few things I've got to put in. Ruby, there was something you were going to ask somewhere? Maybe not. Okay. Well, let me know. Anything else? I rarely finish like right on time, so I'm kind of excited. All right. So then here's the deal. Going forward, if you want to really, if this is making sense, here's what I would recommend. We have 4 weeks or 3 weeks, I guess. I will find this. I'll manage to post the meditation we did today, or another guided meditation in that space, so you can access that. Perhaps you have your own. You don't have to do follow mine. That's okay. To try to do something like that, 12 to 15 minutes a day minimum, right? In my observations, 15 minutes a day, it takes people a couple of weeks to really start to notice. Mishi Zhao, who's a really wonderful researcher in the US, found 12 minutes was what it took, a daily practice, which is fine. So somewhere in there. I would also recommend that you find, if there are emotional reactions or situations that make you emotional that you would like to change, flag them. Maybe just 1 or 2 really easy ones, nothing too high stakes. You don't want, because you'll just fail with the high stakes ones. You want to have something that you can change. And really think about this in terms of captured versus controlled attention, in terms of interrupting the mechanisms that create any type of distress or emotions. That's what we're looking at. If you're a Buddhist, you're trying to interrupt the mechanisms of suffering. It's just true. If you want to interrupt the mechanisms of karma and afflictions, and you can sit down and just do that, that is pretty cool. I'm very impressed, right? If you're looking for a way in, look at emotions. This is the way in my opinion. The way in. Start interrupting the emotional mechanisms. Yeah. Then as your attention improves and your skills improve, you get earlier and earlier on this timeline. And then you can start switching to other types of mindfulness practice and other genres of meditation altogether that, you've got, it's almost, in fact, here's a good way to finish an example. It's kind of like what mindfulness training will give you is an ability to really be aware of and even examine your mental states as you go and these mechanisms and things that are happening. Because, let's say I have a really difficult memory from, a few years ago. And so I go back, and so I want to analyze this memory. And then I start remembering it and I just get all caught up and emotional in it. And I just relive it. What mindfulness training will do, and I will explain how, based on some super clever research and 2,500 years of Buddhist peer review, of course. What you want to be able to do is have the memory arise and not be affected by it, and then be able to observe the mechanisms that create the distress or create the emotion, right? And this is why meditation is, we should be thinking about this as contemplative technology, the same way astrophysicists or whoever, astronomers use telescopes or microbiologists use microscopes. That's what it's for, is to stop and examine mental states and start to see the mechanisms play out, right? Then that's what mindfulness training does. It's like the telescope or microscope. Telescope's a better one, actually, that you use to more closely observe the phenomenon, right? Then once you've observed it, we switch or we combine these constructive and deconstructive, these other types of practices that are not just mindfulness practices. They rely on mindfulness, but there's more, they're active. And what they do, they sit there and they just start throwing spanners in the works, right? That's what they're for. But you don't just throw spanners around. You want to aim them really, really, really accurately. And that's what it is. You start throwing spanners in and interrupting. And so you can sort of really gently interrupt them in a very coarse way in the meditation. They get more and more and more and more subtle. And I get, like earlier, I interrupt these mechanisms start to play out and I interrupt them earlier and earlier, like this. And then what I can do it on the cushion, and then in the outside world, I just start habitually interrupting them, right? And you want to just push that one step further, right? Is to actually identify some that are problematic and decide what I would prefer to do. Normally, I do this. I would like to do this, right? And write them down. Absolutely write them down. You can throw them away. You don't have to show them to anyone. But when you write things down, you will, it's about 60%, I think, more likely to follow through. So you just write these things down. That's why you're always asked to sign a petition before they ask you for money. But that's the reason why. Because once you've signed your name, and then they ask you for money, like, oh shit, I just signed. Whereas if they just ask you for money, it's like, no, I'm broke. But so it's the same thing here. If you think, oh yeah, actually this would be a better, when I deal with that co-worker, family member, whatever, it would be much better to say or do this, sort of write it down. And then you're more likely to do that, right? And that it's a very big spanner just thrown very roughly into a big machine. It's not very accurate, but you're starting to interrupt the mechanisms. Yeah. And we'll push through this, in a few weeks. If you have time, of course, that's what the Cultivating Emotional Balance program later in June is all about, is really identifying them very, very granularly, very, very accurately, and really explaining how you get in. And because in amongst all this, and then we can finish. Instead of emotions as being these things that happen and control us and cause us problems, what emotions should be, if they're working properly, if they're balanced. What an emotion should be a signpost that tells you something you think important is happening. That's what emotions are for. So an emotion is like, oh, something I think important is happening. And then that's cool. But of course, what you want to do is learn, you want to know it's anger. At the moment, we're not very good at it. We just get all caught up in it. It's like, oh, that's anger. And so in the CEB course, we explain why anger, what it does, what its function is, all these things. And so say, oh, that's anger. When I'm angry, I have a plan. I'm going to do this. When I'm sad, when I'm contemptuous, when I'm disgusted. And we go through 7 different emotions, I think. So that when they arise, it's like, oh, something I think important is happening. Is it important? For example, I'm afraid of dogs. I see a dog in the distance. Is it really a dog? No, it's a bush, in the dark. So the question, you can do all this in, less than half a second. You can question all these things that arise, and the better your mindfulness practice, the more quickly and deeply you make the questions, and so the more quickly and accurately you can decide if there is an interruption to a mechanism that needs it. If there's a mechanism that needs interrupting, and how you're going to interrupt it, right? And what you're going to do in place. And this all happens in fractions of a second. But without the mindfulness training, without settling in, it's just super interesting stuff that I can tell you that you can't put into practice. Have to do the mindfulness stuff. Okay, so now it's like 4 minutes past 8. I'm extra embarrassed because I sort of get you out on time. So thank you. Please feel free to get in touch with me. If you do sign up for this, you will go on a mailing list. You can unsubscribe at any time. This is the easiest way for me to get it to you. Just get in touch if you have any questions, and I'll be back next week. And maybe you'll be too, who knows. All right, you're free to go. Thank you.